RFK Jr., who is extremely popular right now, not just as a candidate, but in the Democrat Party. Now, of course, the DNC and the establishment, which is essentially most of the Democrat Party, they don't support him, but he is extremely high in the polls. He's getting a lot of attention. He's somewhat controversial, at least from the establishment point of view, but he's saying a lot of truth. He's exposing what really occurred with his uncle, with his father. His family has been in politics for a long time, decades, and we already know about the history of his family, but there's a lot more to it than the average person knows. For example, his father ran for the presidency as a Democrat in 1968, and he was taken out, right? So RFK Jr. has decided to step into the limelight to, of course, he has certain issues that, let's say, the average person won't see him as presidential, but a lot of his ideologies in terms of exposing the different institutions that have abused us and taken advantage of us for decades, well, more than decades, for centuries if you accumulate all of the institutions, but of course, in modern history, decades. He's exposing all that, and a lot of people specifically tied to these institutions don't like that. Now, he has asked for Secret Service protection, and it's upon the Department of Homeland Security if they want to grant that to a major presidential candidate. Now, after 1968, after his father was taken out, the United States government actually said, we're going to offer Secret Service protection to all major presidential candidates because we don't want this to occur to a potentially future president of the United States. We could go into a lot of theories about his father, why he was taken out, but putting that aside, there's a lot of discretion. There's no hard or fast rule. It's all discretion based off the current ruling regime, Department of Homeland Security, if they want to, well, rather, when they want to grant Secret Service protection and who they want to grant it to. Now, the general rule is to grant it to major candidates closer to the election, but there have been a lot of exceptions. For example, Obama got early Secret Service protection, and there was a critique about that. And RFK Jr., knowing his family history, knowing his dad was taken out, knowing his uncle was taken out, but his dad was taken out while he was running for president, RFK Jr. is saying a lot of things that are controversial, but it's not actually controversial. It's only controversial against the establishment, like I said before, which are just the major institutions that control big aspects of our society, whether it's the school system, the monetary system. There's a lot of suppression of let's say, free speech, right? We're seeing that everywhere. But a lot of suppression of historical truths, a lot of suppression about medical truths, scientific truths. So we are seeing that RFK Jr., when he is talking about certain things that expose institutions and expose individuals, that is a hard critique against certain people, certain entities that don't want to be critiqued. They want to operate from behind the scenes in the shadows. They don't want any light on themselves because they are committing criminal actions, and they don't want their criminal actions to be shown to the public, because if more of the public know about what they've done, or know about what they're doing, or know about what they're going to do in the future, that would serve a problem for them, because then they lose their opportunity to have more control over the populace. So the Department of Homeland Security has denied offering Secret Service protection to RFK Jr., even while we all know, at least people who are privy to this type of content, we all know about his father, we all know about JFK, we all know about RFK and RFK Jr. and his views, and how generally the vast majority of even government entities within the executive branch, but also the other branches, but mainly the executive branch, don't like what he's saying. Of course they're not going to offer Secret Service protection because, frankly, that goes against their interests. They want to stay in power. They want to make sure that there's no expose about what they're doing, and they have certain interests that they are collaborating with. So they have to protect those interests. So RFK Jr., now this is news for a reason. Now typically you don't get news like this because it would be suppressed, quite frankly, but you don't get news like this because it makes the government look bad. And rather, it asks questions of people. It prompts questions of people. People are going to ask, why did he ask for Secret Service protection? Why did he feel the need to ask that so early on? At least that's a perception that it's early on. We're 18 months out from the election. And why did he get denied? Well, the simple story may be he asked for Secret Service protection. He's a little bit paranoid. He has a right to be paranoid. 18 months out, that's too far. So the Department of Homeland Security said no, makes sense. That would be a way to kind of write it off. But it prompts the question of, if he feels compelled to do this, why? And the why is the historical background that I just gave, but also he's saying a lot of information that other entities don't want to have exposed. At the same time, the government is saying no, because they want to do all that, but the government is also working in tandem with these interests, as I've already allotted out here. So these are major considerations when we already know major considerations to think about. We already know that candidates in the past have gotten Secret Service protection earlier on, with less, let's say, historical trauma. And we have people right now within the current administration. Now, there are some who are, by law, supposed to get Secret Service, but there are people who are just there by proxy who are getting Secret Service protection. And they're not running for president. They're not running to be a public servant. They're not running for anything, but they're getting that protection. So right here we see and I'm surprised this is actually news. Now, it didn't take off and go viral, and it's not everywhere. It was there for a couple days, and then it went away. And largely, only independent news or conservative news was really talking about it. You had some leftist news that were talking about it, but again, there for a day, gone. So we're seeing that the government itself, mainly the executive branch, because they have all the force. If you're going to protect someone, you're going to have to protect them and defend using force. You can't just defend someone using the judicial branch, right? That's because that's analysis and interpretation. Or the legislative branch, that's just creating laws, which restricts freedom by definition. It has to be the executive branch. The executive branch has a lot of interests that, I mean, we've seen that there have been internal memos by the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, this very department of the federal government under the executive branch, the DHS, the FBI. There have been memos of how they want to censor free speech and how they're not only infiltrating, but they're working with big social media companies to go and say, hey, we need to take down these posts and get rid of this post. And hey, just a forewarning, there may be information about X, Y, and Z. Make sure you guys look out for that. Kind of suppress it a little bit. They even had a portal on Twitter before Elon Musk took over, where these federal agents could log in from their entities, their government entities, and then suppress the information themselves. So we have a lot of infiltration. So the same entities that are supposed to be upholding the Constitution, which allows free speech, are the same entities that are going in and censoring free speech. So of course they're not going to have the notion or the idea, really not even the notion or idea, but the will, the discipline to protect a major candidate who is trying to expose all of that, right? You have a major candidate right here who, I talked about this before, but he went in front of a hearing in Congress, hearing on censorship, okay? So this hearing is to have people from the left, people from the right, mainly, when I say left and right, Democrats, Republicans, come together and talk about censorship and how it's extremely prevalent in today's society and how it's a problem, right? We're not just talking about Hunter Biden's laptop. Everyone's been talking about that. It's other pieces of information. It could be you posting an Instagram story and that gets censored or your account gets suspended because you're saying some information that arbitrarily goes against the guidelines, but you're being selectively persecuted for your political ideology, your belief, and that stops the flow of information. So now other people don't get to see that information. They're not even aware that that information exists or that they should have the right to see that information because they don't get access to that information at all. It's stopped before the person can even receive it. So we're in a situation where that is occurring, and you have people on the left, Democrats, who are saying, we're on a hearing about censorship, but we need to kick RFK Jr., because he was there, we need to kick RFK Jr. out because he's utilizing hate speech. Well, now you're censoring, again, you're censoring on a hearing about censorship when there's no such thing as hate speech. I mean, from a subjective point of view, you could say something is hate speech, but from an objective point of view, all speech is allowed by the First Amendment, even if you disagree with it. There have been plenty of examples, even of people on the right, who are Republican, who are so-called libertarian or conservatives. They say they're for absolute free speech. Now, be very careful about what you say when you say absolute. Now, I'm for absolute free speech. There are costs to it, but if our founding fathers were abiding by the laws at the time, we would not have this country right now. They had to utilize certain speech to even create this country. And a lot of that speech would be considered, let's say, an act of violence in today's terms by the Democrats, where that's exactly what we see right now, where they're indicting Trump and they're trying to charge him criminally because he's basically criticizing what happened in 2020. So RFK Jr. goes to this hearing. They're talking about censorship, and you have Democrats saying, why is he here? We need to kick him out. As per the rules of Congress, he's saying hate speech, and we can't allow hate speech in this hearing, even though this hearing is about censorship and addressing censorship because it's happening too it's all too common. It's too overt or even covert, but it's happening all too common. Now, the rules of Congress, whether or not they were being accurate with that, that is below the First Amendment. The free speech First Amendment, it supersedes any kind of policy you may have in Congress or policy anywhere else, assuming it's related to a public entity. If you're in a private entity, like a private business, and they're not getting taxpayer dollars by any means, you can regulate speech however you want. It's your business. You can have whatever demands or requirements, qualifications that you want. But when it comes to government, we're saying government interject. Now, the Constitution is a piece of paper. So if people don't value it, if people don't have faith in it, if people don't use their willpower to protect it, to protect other people, well, it means nothing, right? So right now we have the executive branch. They don't care about protecting candidates who are freely speaking. They want to shut them down. They don't care about candidates who are exposing criminal activity within our institutions and even within government, which is also why the Secret Service under the DHS, they don't want to protect him as a candidate. They would rather him not be president. RFK Jr. is not supported by the DNC for a reason. He's saying that he's a Democrat, but he's really not a Democrat. He still has ideologies on abortion and all that. That may be Democrat. But the rest of his ideas align more with libertarian conservative concepts than they do with Democrat or Democrat socialism concepts. So the DNC doesn't like him because he can't be controlled, and he's exposing them. So quite frankly, he's not going to get much support from the DNC. It's going to be very hard for him to be on the ballot, to be honest. Not to say he won't be on the ballot. But the DNC, that whole party, they don't even support him. And so this is just a mess. We have the main takeaway here is we have our federal agencies. They're supposed to protect the Constitution. They're supposed to protect the law of the land. They're doing everything they can to go against that. They're going against candidates that are actually trying to do good for the country. I will say there's a lot of negative with RFK Jr., but in terms of all of the other Democrat candidates, he is saying what they're not saying. Now, I don't know if he'll actually pursue it and have action to do it. And even as a president, just because you're campaigning for a few years and you get in doesn't mean you're going to be able to execute all that. Quite frankly, most presidents are not able to execute what they say, aside from them lying. Let's say they're lying about something. When they go into office and they theoretically have the power to execute on something, they typically can't because they haven't built the infrastructure of people. It's really about people to enforce certain action. See, what you really have to do, and I've mentioned this before a few times, is you'd really have to go in you'd have to think about this when you were younger, okay, 20s and 30s. And you have to build a portfolio for the next 20 to 30 years of a network. And this network has to consist of people who are like-minded, who see your vision. They share the same ideology. Now, you may not all necessarily agree on every little detail, but you have a general consensus of how you want to pursue policy. And then you have to master marketing, sales, organization, structure, you have to master all of these different aspects of like building a business or building a brand or building a campaign. And then when you're 50 or 60 years old, then you have the infrastructure, you have the people, 50 to 150 people who can infiltrate part of not just the government, but different institutions. And they each also know another 50 to 150 people. And then all of these people can also infiltrate these different institutions. Now, when you have a hold on these different institutions, because you have people in high places and you need to enforce your policy, now you can make that link and actually affect that change. See, when Trump was in office, most of the bureaucratic state, the administrative state, was not on his side. So you even had whistleblowers and leakers within the White House exposing his calls. You had people who he gave an order, they wouldn't listen to him, which is treason, by the way. You need to listen to the commander-in-chief. He has been elected by we the people, and everyone part of that organization needs to acquiesce to the idea, this is in the Constitution, that you are enforcing the will of the people. And if you don't enforce the will of the people, you are not doing what the role of government is set out to do. And if you're not doing what the role of government is set out to do, the people have the right to abolish the current government because the government is no longer serving them, which ultimately is what the desire is. And you fall within the desire of the people. So we saw that within that administration, people down the chain of command were not listening to people above the chain of command. And this actually expands a lot larger. There's rogue factions of government where they don't listen to anything. They're siphoning money from the taxpayer. They're siphoning money from the Pentagon. They're siphoning money from all these different programs, welfare programs, and they take this money and they work on projects on the side, and they are unofficially higher up than even the President of the United States. And that's really sad to say that there's evidence of that, and we do have people who are part of these different organizations that are separate, and of course they're still tied to the government. Some of them also work within the government, but they've kind of branched off, and they're like a para-government, quasi-government, and they have a lot of hands in what the government is going to do. Again, specifically the executive branch, because the executive branch has all the power. When I say they have all the power, they have all the force. Force is the ultimate authority. That's just how we as humans operate. The last resort is force. So, of course, we can come together and use common sense, logic, reasoning. That's kind of the judicial system. But if all else fails, people use force, right? This is the ultimate thing that you can do. This is why the nuclear weapon, the atomic bomb, the H-bomb, That's the final thing you can do to stop someone in their tracks. That's why it's the ultimate deterrent. That's why we've had the greatest amount of peace historically in humankind, at least in recent events, because we have a deterrent. All these nations have a deterrent. We use the nuclear bombs against each other. It's mutually assured destruction. So, with that being said, we need to understand just how compromised people within the executive branch are, people within these different federal agencies are, which are so bloated, by the way. The founding fathers could not have foreseen that the executive branch would take their power and abuse it so heavily. There's effectively no checks and balances. The founding fathers created the Constitution to have checks and balances, where if someone passes law in legislature, the judicial branch could say, nope, that's not how we're interpreting it to match the Constitution. It's unconstitutional. The judicial branch interprets something. They say something is constitutional. The executive branch says, no, it's not constitutional. We're not going to enforce it. That would be a check and balance system, assuming everyone is civil and using common sense, logic, reasoning, and there is no force being the ultimate authority. But when you understand humans, you understand that force is the ultimate authority. Therefore, the branch that has the most force has the ultimate authority. There's no check and balance. So the judicial branch and the legislative branch, they don't have anything to back them up in terms of force. So, you have Capitol Police for legislature, but that's not really substantial. And then the judicial branch, they have nothing. But the executive branch, over time, people have figured out a loophole, which is to just create a bunch of federal agencies and then use regulation as law, which they can't do. You can't create regulation. Regulation should really be a guide, okay? And then people have the free market and they decide what they want to pursue. But to have regulation and to say that now it's law and thus we can enforce it, that's unconstitutional, because only Congress can make law. You can't create the EPA, for example, have a regulation and that's enforceable by fine or criminal penalty. Again, that goes against the Constitution. You have to pass a law and able to do that. But the executive branch, they have so much bureaucracy. They create so many federal agencies. All of these federal agencies, including now the IRS, they're arming themselves. They have force. So they can come to you, whether you agree or not, and say, this is our narrative, this is what we're going to do, and despite anything else, if you don't agree with us, you'll be at the whim of our force. And so they're heavily compromised. Are there good people in there? Yes. But a lot of these good people, they have to be obedient, they have to acquiesce to the chain of command, the hierarchy. They're not necessarily in positions of power. A lot of these positions of power, the people who are able to make decisions and have people below them do their bidding, these are the people who are corrupt. These are the people who are sycophants, and they really only care about the power. They don't care about the collateral, and they do that because they want to enrich themselves and the people around them. And when you have that shortcut, the shortcut is, I want to enrich myself. The shortcut is, this is politics, right? I have something that I want. In order for me to get what I want, I have to make sure that this guy gets what he wants. And there's also this other guy over there that wants to get what he wants, right? And so now you're trying to figure out something mutual where you can all get what you want. And because you're helping someone else out, he's more likely to help you out. And maybe there's a mutual connection there. It just so happens that having collateral, whether it's financial collateral, ideological collateral, actual casualty collateral, that is a shortcut. Unfortunately, that's a shortcut. And people use force to enforce their interests, to make sure their interests are fulfilled. Now, oftentimes it's messy, but they try to cover it up. They try to make sure that it's... In America, we do it in a more sophisticated manner than in other nations. In other nations, if you look at other developing nations or even developed nations, we as Americans, looking from the outside, we can see that other nations are heavily corrupt. We can see that their media is corrupt. We can see that the conflicts they engage in are corrupt. We can see that not 100%, because a lot of people are not in tune with this, but generally, if you ask the average person, if you ask them, hey, is this country, what do you think about this country relative to America, their court system, X, Y, and Z? If you dig deep enough, people would largely say they're corrupt. Now, America is no different, right? Humans are humans, and especially in America, it's not like racial, right? We are not homogenous like in other nations. We have every race here, every religion here, more so than any other nation. So you have the perfect schema for humans being humans in America who have a meritocratic system, and they can take opportunity over that. So in other nations, there's no meritocracy. I mean, very little, depending on the nation that you go to. So there's already an artificial barrier for people to enter. And that's why there's a lot of corruption at the top and no one can do anything. Here in America, there's meritocracy. That provides opportunity. However, you have cheaters in the system, and they take advantage of that. So they go in with meritocratic ideology, and then they create a barrier, an artificial barrier. They want to remove meritocracy, even though they got to the top by meritocracy, right? It's a contradiction. but not so much, because if all you care about is power, it's like you want to empower your side. You say, hey, you guys should be okay with free speech. Let us say what we want to say. Then the other side says, okay, fine, you get free speech just like we get free speech, right? You say, yeah, we all get free speech. Then you go into power because you got free speech and you were able to utilize that. And then you shut down free speech from the other side. The other side comes to you and says, hey, when we had power, we gave you free speech. Now that you have power, you took away our free speech. Why is that? I thought we agreed. And you come in and you say, yeah, I only did that because I wanted power. Now I want to solidify my power and prevent you from ever getting power again, so I'm going to take away your free speech. And thus you don't have free speech, I have free speech, and that's what I utilize to get in. So that's what I mean. We have a meritocratic system. People come in, they take advantage of that, they take opportunity of that, which is fine. But they create an artificial barrier to entry, and then they remove that system for everyone else. And it just gets worse and worse and worse as time goes on. Unfortunately, having a constitutional republic is an anomaly. Tyranny is the main way we operate nations. That's historically how it's always been. When we'll have another America, I have no idea. But just seeing the compromise of entities in our overall system in America is very saddening. And it just shows that if we're not doing something, I mean, at this point, it's more about preservation. How long can we hold on to this idea of America? I don't know if we're able to go back. I mean, that's going to be extremely difficult to do. But how long can we hold on to this idea of having the United States of America, where we have individual rights, entrepreneurship, law and order, people have freedom, so long as you don't infringe on anyone else's rights, freedom of movement, freedom of purchasing whatever you want, freedom of risk, freedom of reward. How long do we have left of that? That's really the question that we're asking. I'm introducing Constitutes Plus. This is a place where you can access exclusive content. The links are going to be in the description. This is going to be me, of course, investigative journalism, hard-hitting stories, even stories that we can't talk about anywhere else. It's at an affordable price. If you cannot afford the price, don't even worry about it. I'm going to post free content all the time. But this is a place where if you want to support or if you want to grow and expand our platform, what we're doing here, you're going to get new topics, new videos every single week. And the goal is to, with enough audience and capital, expand what we're doing with other creators where they can also come on and share their truth, their content. And of course, this is all based on the reality of the world, not some delusional reality that we now live in.